guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 22nd episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. Since there's a much higher number of classics from New York in the 80s compared to the West Coast or really anywhere else, next I wanted to talk about arguably the single most important group and album to come out of the golden era. From my personal experience growing up in LA and California, N.W.A is definitely the most famous rap group because, as I've mentioned before in other videos, I've met people that have never even heard of A Tribe Called Quest or Wu-Tang Clan. Like, they say those names just don't even ring a bell. And maybe it's just where I grew up, but I've never heard somebody say that about N.W.A. If you aren't too familiar with the full roster, it was originally comprised of Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, MC Ren, DJ Yella, and Arabian Prince. The DOC was frequently associated with N.W.A at this time, and I believe he was actually the first out of any of them to put out a solo album, which is definitely a classic you have to check out. However, I don't believe he was ever technically a member of N.W.A, and the same year that he put out his debut, he would tragically get in a car accident that would leave his vocal cords all shredded. For the most part, his career was cut short. He has one more solo album that came out after he lost his vocal cords that I don't think is very popular amongst fans, but I actually enjoy it a good amount. It has a weirdly disturbing and dark quality his new voice worked for, but it's a bit harsh to listen to, and it's so vastly different from the music he originally made, it's virtually for an entirely different audience. Anyway, back to the core group, what made them so popular was the way each member brought their own strong suit to the team. If you don't know what N.W.A stands for, it's and there you go. They actually released an album before this one under N.W.A and the Posse, but it was Straight Outta Compton that really put them and Compton on the map. There was obviously already plenty of West Coast rappers putting on for California, most notably Ice-T, who was essential in N.W.A.'s development, as Ice Cube will tell you. But while Ice-T was groundbreaking with his content and point of view, it was N.W.A.'s hard-hitting, relentless production and graphic lyrics that would make it the most head-turning album to come out of the West Coast in the 80s. Songs like Straight Outta Compton and Fuck the Police completely changed the course of music. It's extremely common to hear people take shots at the police in music nowadays, but you have to remember this was 1988, and this sort of spitting in the face of authority made white America clutch their pearls. As I mentioned in my Public Enemy video, these two groups to me share a lot of similarities when it comes to the noisy anti-establishment approach they took. However, they also had plenty of differences. For instance, the difference in coasts results in a separate sound and atmosphere, and while Dr. Dre and DJ Yella had blunt, uncompromising production, Terminator X and the Bomb Squad were a bit more polished and technically proficient. Also, while Chuck D was using political and historical references with more of a Malcolm X angle, N.W.A showed their frustration with racism and police brutality in their own way. Obviously, there's a degree of misogyny that you have to take with a grain of salt. I don't think any of these guys are walking around calling women bitches or hoes. And them speaking on the record how they would speak alone with their friends is a testament to this record's authenticity. The lyrics are handled by Ice Cube, MC Ren, and I believe the DOC as well, but the verses they write for Eazy and Dre are brought alive by their dope voices and personality on the mic, especially Eazy. Eazy-E is probably the most excused legendary rapper where everyone knows he didn't write his verses, and it wasn't even a secret besides Dre, but since he's a producer first and also doesn't hide it, nobody really cares. But with Eazy, it couldn't matter less if he wrote the verses or not, because he was one of the most enigmatic MCs in hip-hop, and his verses without him rapping them are just some words on a sheet of paper. These guys would all go on to show how talented and capable they were by all progressing as rappers and artists with their solo material that would land all over top hip-hop album lists. Outside of The Chronic, you probably won't find many that ever topped Straight Outta Compton. Speaking of The Chronic, while it was obviously a little too famous to do right away, I'm actually gonna knock it out once I get back to my next group of 90s albums because I'm gonna just kind of do all iconic ones there just to get him out of the way in one stretch. I'll more than likely end up having Doggy Style in that next group as well. I haven't really mentioned Snoop so far in this review because he wasn't really around at this time, but you really can't talk about The Chronic without talking about Snoop, so I wanted to at least give him a mention. Also, one more legend I just wanted to give a quick shout out who wasn't quite on the scene yet at this time, but I feel like he's often underrated, and I might not get around to him in that next group because he doesn't have an album as iconic as Doggy Style. But I wanted to at least mention Quick is the Name by DJ Quick, and I love Rhythmalism too. I think he's honestly one of probably a top 10 West Coast producer of all time. But despite it preceding those, Straight Outta Compton is an album that gets even better when you listen to it in retrospect because it's fun as a younger fan who grew up knowing guys like Ice Cube and Dr. Dre independently as pop culture icons, then going back and hearing how it all started. The chemistry and contrast of the voices and styles makes every song endlessly entertaining, and nobody brings less than 100% on any given verse. Cube's mean, in your face attitude is a perfect partner for Eazy-E's more high registered voice. Ren and Dre sort of even out the playing field, and with the funky samples Yella and Dre flip, there isn't a dull moment in sight on here. I think the star MC on this album would have to be Ice Cube. Albums like The Predator display why he was the most lyrically fit out of all of N.W.A. in my opinion. One of my favorite songs on here has this super funky, infectious loop, which is Gangsta Gangsta. It also features a dope Boogie Down production sample, and I always enjoy hearing old school legends showing love by sampling or referencing a contemporary. While an act like BDP was pretty strong on stopping gang violence and keeping hip hop about being a fun and productive outlet, NWA represented a section of people that felt fed up and pushed to the edge by racial profiling and police brutality. Obviously, by the complexion of my skin tone, I'm not quite qualified to speak on these topics. I'm honestly just giving my point of view as a random white guy attempting to put myself in these people's shoes, but knowing I really can't fully do that or relate to their experiences. Honestly, this channel and series in general is going to end up being much more of just what hip hop means to me and what the background of the artist and album is to the best of my knowledge, opposed to an actually verified professional series where anything I say should be written in stone. As someone in their 20s talking about an album from over 30 years ago, obviously you have to take my opinions with a grain of salt. But the vibe I always got from Straight Outta Compton is kind of like the end scene and Do the Right Thing, and fast forward like 30-45 seconds. If you somehow haven't seen that movie and you don't want to have the ending spoiled, I'll wait. Okay, so at the end of that movie, they basically burned down the shop that their friend had been killed at, and the director of that movie, Spike Lee, has talked about how the only people who've ever asked him, why do those black people destroy the store, are white people. That's not to say white people are incapable of understanding the movie or empathizing with the ending. I certainly do. But to me, I think the point is it's this human primal element where this long history of oppression is bubbling up, and there's a boiling point when you see somebody who looks just like you getting slaughtered or belittled for the millionth time. You could argue about whether them destroying the business or not is justified, but honestly, I feel like it kind of misses the point. These people didn't wreck the store and go home and high five each other because they felt awesome. Nobody won in that situation. That theme relates to NWA and this album to me because that same feeling of we aren't going to take this anymore is sort of a underlying MO to this entire project. However, you do still have moments like Express Yourself that weigh the scale in the other direction a bit by coming with a more positive message. Which isn't to imply the rest of it's a negative message. It's like any other music that talks about real life that's depressing. You can't say it's glorifying that just because they talk about it. Overall, the content combined with how the album was executed sonically has led it to becoming one of the most celebrated albums in hip hop history. This album was a stepping stone to producing some of the biggest names that would ever come out of the genre, and any modern legend, West Coast or not, either loves this album and reveres it as a classic or at the very least respects it. That being said, my three favorite songs on here would consist of Straight Outta Compton, Gangsta Gangsta, and Quiet on the Set. But with an album with this many classic songs, you kind of have to have a couple honorable mentions, like Fuck the Police, Parental Discretion is Advised, and 8 Ball Remix. Thank you for watching my 20-second video. As I mentioned at the beginning, the 80s was a decade pretty much primarily dominated by New York when it comes to hip-hop. So the next three are all going to be New York albums like the first one was, but I wanted to do N.W.A so early to kind of balance it out a little. Also, there's plenty of other classic 80s albums from California. I have at least like a few of them, but I just didn't feel any of the others were as essential as the next three I'm going to talk about. So if you want to see which East Coast Golden Age classic I'm going to talk about next, be sure to tune in for that. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs off Straight Outta Compton are. And don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.